The gunshot echoed through the valley like distant thunder, ricocheting off the rust-colored cliffs that framed the small town of Redemption Creek. Olivia Sullivan didn't hear it, not really. Not after the first blinding moment of pain that sent her tumbling from her horse and into the dusty Arizona dirt. The world around her blurred, the azure sky spinning like a child's toy above her as warm blood seeped through her riding dress, turning the cornflower blue fabric to a sickening purple. The year was 1878, and Olivia had only wanted to deliver medicine to the widow Parker outside of town, a simple errand that should have taken an hour at most. Nobody was supposed to know about the gold certificates tucked inside her saddlebag payment for her father's store that she'd volunteered to collect when he'd fallen ill with fever 3 days prior. "Stay still, miss," a deep voice commanded as strong arms cradled her, lifting her from the ground. Through the haze of pain, she glimpsed sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a stormy sky. "They're gone now." "My horse," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ringing in her ears. "The money." "Forget the money," the stranger said, his voice tight with urgency. "You've been shot." Olivia felt herself being carried, each step sending waves of agony through her left side. The man's heartbeat thumped steadily against her cheek as her consciousness wavered. She'd never been held by a man who wasn't family, and some distant part of her mind found it strange that her first thought was of her mother's warnings about propriety rather than the bullet lodged somewhere in her body. The stranger lowered her onto soft grass beside a stream, away from the trail and hidden by a stand of cottonwood trees. With practiced hands, he tore a strip from his own shirt and pressed it against her wound. "I need to get you to a doctor," he said, his voice gravelly with concern. "Town's 5 miles, she managed, teeth chattering despite the summer heat. "Too far with you bleeding like this." His expression was grim as he worked, his movements quick but gentle. "I'll need to stop the bleeding first." The pain flared white-hot as he pressed harder, and Olivia couldn't suppress a cry. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. "I'm sorry," he murmured, genuine anguish in his tone. "I know it hurts something fierce." Through the pain, Olivia finally took in her rescuer. He wasn't much older than her, 22 years, perhaps 26 or 27. His dark hair curled from beneath a worn leather hat, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his strong jaw. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and a silver star glinted on his vest. "You're a lawman," she observed weakly. "Vaughn Slater, Deputy U.S. Marshal." He didn't look up from his work as he spoke. "Was tracking those men who shot you. They're wanted for stagecoach robbery near Tucson." A wave of dizziness washed over Olivia, and she felt herself slipping away. The last thing she saw was Marshal Slater's face, etched with determination as he worked to save her life. "Stay with me," he urged, his voice seeming to come from far away. "Don't you die on me, miss." The world faded to black. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments, firelight dancing on canvas above her, the scent of coffee and wood smoke, the dull throb in her side that flared to agonizing when she tried to move. "Easy now," the marshal's voice again, closer this time. "You've been out since noon." Olivia blinked, trying to orient herself. She was lying in a small tent, a saddle serving as her pillow, and a rough wool blanket tucked around her. Outside, night had fallen, and she could hear the soft sounds of a campfire crackling. "Where?" Her throat felt like sandpaper. "We're about 3 miles off the main trail," Vaughn explained, helping her sit up just enough to sip from a tin cup of water. "Those outlaws might circle back, so I thought it best to lay low." As the water soothed her parched throat, memories came flooding back: the ambush, the gunshot, the pain. Her hand flew to her side, finding clean bandages where she expected a bloodied mess. "I got the bullet out," Vaughn said, noticing her confusion. "Wasn't as deep as I feared, and you're young and strong. Fever's the danger now." She stared at him, trying to process his words. "You removed a bullet? Are you a doctor as well as a marshal?" A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "No, madam, but 4 years in the cavalry during the war taught me more about bullet wounds than I ever wanted to know." For the first time, Olivia noticed the weariness etched in his face. How long had he sat vigil beside her? My father, she began, thinking of how worried he must be. I sent word to town with a passing freighter, Vaughn assured her. Told him to let the shopkeeper Sullivan know his daughter was safe, but delayed. Didn't mention the shooting, no need to worry him sick. Relief washed over her. Thank you. She tried to sit up further, but gasped as pain lanced through her side. Vaughn's hand was immediately on her shoulder, easing her back down. You need to rest. That wound needs time to heal. But those men, they took the money, nearly $600 in gold certificates. My father's business will be ruined. Money can be replaced. You can't. His eyes, illuminated by the firelight filtering through the canvas, held hers with unexpected intensity. When I found you on that trail, I thought... He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Olivia felt a curious warmth that had nothing to do with fever. This stranger had saved her life, tended her wound, and was now guarding her while she recovered. In the harsh frontier of Arizona territory, such kindness was rare. I don't even know your first name, Miss Sullivan, Vaughn said after a moment. Olivia, she replied, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance and the impropriety of their situation alone in the wilderness, her clothing cut away to tend her wound. As if reading her thoughts, he said, I've been as proper as circumstances allow, Miss Olivia. I promise you that. She believed him. Something in those storm-gray eyes spoke of honor, as immutable as the mountains themselves. You should try to sleep more, he advised, adjusting the blanket. We'll head for town tomorrow if you're strong enough. Before she could respond, a wave of exhaustion swept over her, and she drifted back into darkness. The fever came in the night, just as Vaughn had feared. Olivia woke to her own chattering teeth and a cold sweat that left her shivering despite the desert heat. Through the haze of delirium, she was aware of Vaughn's constant presence, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, coaxing water between her lips, changing the bandage on her wound. Stay with me, he murmured repeatedly, his voice a lifeline she clung to as fever dreams threatened to pull her under. Fight, Olivia. You have to fight. In her lucid moments, she caught glimpses of raw concern in his eyes, a worry that seemed too personal for a lawman who'd known her less than a day. Once, she thought she felt his calloused hand squeeze hers, heard him whisper, Please don't leave me too. But she couldn't be certain what was real and what was fever dream. Dawn broke on her second day under Vaughn's care, finding her fever finally broken, but her body weak as a newborn colt's. He helped her sit up, his hands strong and steady. You had me worried, he admitted, relief evident in the relaxation of his shoulders as he offered her a tin plate of beans and salt pork. Thought I might lose you in the night. Olivia accepted the food, suddenly ravenous. It seems you're stuck with me, Marshal Slater. A smile tugged at his lips, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and revealing a dimple in his right cheek. I've been called worse things than stuck with a brave young woman. As she ate, Olivia studied him in the morning light. Despite his trail-worn appearance, there was something refined about Vaughn Slater. He spoke well, without the coarse language common to many Western men. His hands, though calloused and strong, moved with a certain grace, and those eyes, they held shadows that spoke of experiences beyond his years. How long have you been a marshal? She asked between careful bites. 3 years, he replied, checking his pistol before sliding it back into its holster. Before that, I ranched with my father in Colorado until he passed. I'm sorry for your loss. Vaughn nodded his acknowledgement. And you? Have you always lived in Redemption Creek? Since I was 16. Father moved us west after Mother died, said there were opportunities for a man willing to work hard. She smiled faintly. He wasn't wrong, though I don't think he envisioned his bookish daughter helping run a general store in a mining town. You seem to handle yourself well. Most women would be hysterical after what you've been through. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Perhaps you don't know many women, Marshal. That earned her another smile, broader this time. Fair point, Miss Sullivan. He cleared their breakfast things and helped her to a more comfortable position. We should reach town by nightfall if we take it slow. Think you can manage the ride? We can share my horse. The thought of being held against Vaughn's chest for the hours-long ride sent an unexpected flutter through Olivia's stomach. I believe I can manage, she said, hoping the warmth in her cheeks would be attributed to her recent fever. Breaking camp took less than half an hour. Vaughn was efficient, his movements speaking of years spent in the saddle. When everything was packed, he helped Olivia to her feet, supporting her weight when her knees threatened to buckle. "Easy now," he murmured, his arm strong around her waist. "Take your time." Standing so close, Olivia was acutely aware of his height. She barely reached his shoulder and the clean masculine scent of leather and sage that clung to him. Despite her weakness, something electric sparked between them, a current she'd never felt before. Mounting the horse proved challenging with her injury, but Vaughn lifted her as if she weighed nothing, settling her in the saddle before swinging up behind her. His arms encircled her as he reached for the reins, creating a secure cage that felt more like protection than confinement. "Comfortable?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Yes," she managed, though comfortable wasn't quite the right word for the tumult of sensations coursing through her. They rode at a gentle pace, Vaughn careful to avoid rough terrain that might jar her wound. The intimacy of their position her back against his chest, his arms around her, was both improper and unavoidable. Yet somehow, out here in the vast wilderness with only hawks and jackrabbits as witnesses, society's strict rules seemed distant and unimportant. "Those men who shot you," Vaughn said after they had ridden in silence for a time. "They're part of the Clayton gang, been terrorizing this territory for months. Stagecoaches, banks, lone travelers, they don't much care who they hurt. And you've been tracking them?" She felt his nod. "Was closing in when I heard the shot and found you instead. By the time I got you stabilized, they had too much of a lead, but I'll find them again." There was a quiet determination in his voice that left no room for doubt. "The money they took," Olivia said hesitantly. "It was everything my father had. The summer order payments from the mines meant to restock our store for winter." Vaughn was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "I'll get it back, Olivia. That's a promise." She believed him, this man she barely knew. Something about Vaughn Slater inspired confidence. Perhaps it was the unwavering certainty in his voice, or maybe the way he'd fought through the night to keep her alive. As the day wore on, Olivia found herself leaning more heavily against him, her strength ebbing as the pain in her side intensified. Vaughn must have noticed, for he adjusted his hold to better support her and slowed their pace further. "Not much farther," he assured her as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. "You're doing fine." But Olivia wasn't fine. Darkness edged her vision, and each breath sent shards of pain through her side. The wound that had seemed to be healing was now throbbing with renewed intensity. "Vaughn," she whispered, using his given name for the first time. "I don't feel well." He reined in immediately, dismounting and lifting her down in one fluid motion. As her feet touched the ground, her legs buckled, and only his quick reflexes prevented her from collapsing. "Let me see," he said, easing her to a sitting position against a boulder. Gently, he moved her torn blouse aside to examine the bandage, his expression darkening at what he found. "It's bleeding again, and warm to the touch." Fear clutched at Olivia's heart. She'd heard of wounds festering, turning bad despite initial treatment. Out here, without proper medical care, such injuries were often fatal. "Am I going to die?" she asked, her voice small. Vaughn's eyes snapped to hers, fierce and determined. "No." He gathered her in his arms, cradling her against his chest as he had when he first found her. "Not while I draw breath." He carried her to a small clearing beneath a stand of pines, well off the trail, but with a clear view of the surrounding terrain. With careful movements, he laid her on his bedroll and knelt beside her. "I need to clean the wound again," he explained, unpacking supplies from his saddlebag. "It's going to hurt." Olivia nodded, bracing herself, as he removed the soiled bandage. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. The wound was angry and red, the flesh around it swollen and hot. Vaughn worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made Olivia see stars when it touched her raw flesh. He applied a poultice of herbs he'd collected, then wrapped it with a fresh bandage torn from his spare shirt. "Rest now," he said when he'd finished, smoothing her hair back from her damp forehead. "We'll stay here tonight." As dusk gathered around them, Vaughn built a small, smokeless fire and prepared a broth from dried meat and wild onions. He helped Olivia sip it slowly, his hand supporting her head with unexpected tenderness. Tell me about yourself, Marshal, she requested, needing distraction from the pain. How does a Colorado rancher become a U.S. Marshal? A shadow crossed Vaughn's face. It's not a pleasant tale. I'd still like to hear it, if you're willing. He was quiet for so long that Olivia thought he might refuse. Then, staring into the flames, he began to speak. After the war, I came home to find my father had expanded the ranch. We were doing well, 50 hands, 2,000 head of cattle, contracts with the army. His voice was distant, as if the memories had physically transported him. Then, the Hayden gang moved into our territory, started rustling cattle at first, then demanding protection money. When my father refused to pay, they burned our south pasture. Olivia watched the firelight play across his features, highlighting the tension in his jaw. I wanted to fight back, but Pa insisted on letting the law handle it, said violence only begets more violence. A bitter laugh escaped him. He was right about that part, at least. What happened? Olivia prompted gently when he fell silent. They came in the night, 6 of them. Shot our foreman when he tried to raise the alarm, then set fire to the bunkhouse. His hand tightened around the coffee cup he held. Pa grabbed his shotgun and told me to get the men out. I did save 14 of our hands from the flames. By the time I got back to the main house, he didn't need to finish. The hollow look in his eyes told Olivia everything. They killed him, she whispered. Vaughn nodded once, a sharp, painful gesture. Beat him first, made him suffer. The local sheriff did nothing, was probably being paid off. So I tracked them myself. Took 3 months, but I found them one by one. Did you kill them? The question slipped out before Olivia could stop it. No, he replied, surprising her. Wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But I remembered what my father said about violence. So I brought them in alive, every last one. His eyes met hers across the fire. A federal judge witnessed the trial, offered me a badge afterward, said men with my tracking skills and moral compass were rare out here. The story explains so much: the shadows in his eyes, his determined pursuit of the Clayton gang, his unwillingness to leave her wounded on the trail. Your father would be proud, Olivia said softly. Maybe. Vaughn set his cup aside. Sometimes I wonder, taking a life, even in the line of duty, it changes a man. Have you? Taken a life? His silence was answer enough. It doesn't make you less, she told him. Not if it was necessary. Not if it was to protect innocent people. He studied her face, as if searching for judgment and finding none. You're quite remarkable, Olivia Sullivan. The way he said her name, soft, yet somehow reverent, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fever or pain. In that moment, despite her injury and their desperate circumstances, Olivia realized she was falling for this quiet, honorable man who had saved her life. The revelation should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a warmth that reached beyond her physical discomfort. You should sleep, Vaughn said, unaware of her thoughts. I'll keep watch. You need rest too, she protested. I'll be fine. He moved to check her wound once more, his touch gentle as he felt her forehead. Your fever's rising again. We'll need to get you to town tomorrow, no matter what. As exhaustion claimed her, Olivia caught his hand in hers. Thank you, Vaughn, she murmured, for everything. His fingers tightened briefly around hers. Sleep now, he said softly. I'll be here when you wake. It was the safest Olivia had felt since her mother died. The fever returned with a vengeance in the night. Olivia drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of Vaughn's constant presence and the pain that seemed to consume her entire being. She called out for her father, for her long, dead mother, sometimes in coherent sentences, and sometimes in broken fragments that made no sense even to her own ears. Through it all, Vaughn remained steadfast. He bathed her burning skin with cool water from the stream, changed the poultice when the old one grew hot with infection, and spoke to her in a low, soothing voice that anchored her to the world of the living. Stay with me, Olivia, he urged when her breathing grew labored. Dawn's coming. Just hold on till dawn. In her delirium, she confessed things she never would have in her right mind. How lonely she'd been since coming west. How she secretly wrote poetry by lamplight after her father went to bed. how she sometimes dreamed of a life beyond the constraints placed on women in this harsh territory. "I want to see the ocean," she told him during one feverish episode. "Mother said it goes on forever. Blue meeting blue until you can't tell where water ends and sky begins." "You will," Vaughn promised, wiping her brow. "I'll take you there myself, when you're well." Whether he meant the words or was simply comforting a dying woman, Olivia couldn't be sure. But they gave her something to cling to as fever dreams threatened to pull her under completely. When consciousness returned fully, pale morning light was filtering through the pine boughs above. Olivia blinked, disoriented, to find Vaughn kneeling beside her, his face haggard from a sleepless night, but his eyes alight with relief. "There you are," he said softly. "Welcome back." Her throat felt raw, her body wrung out like a wash rag, but the fog of fever had lifted. Experimentally, she moved her hand to her side, finding the bandage damp, but the flesh beneath it cooler than before. "The infection?" she croaked. "Broke in the night." The poultice drew out the poison. He offered her water, supporting her head as she drank. "You're not out of danger yet, but I think the worst has passed." Only then did Olivia notice how utterly exhausted he looked, stubble darkening his jaw, shadows beneath his eyes, his shoulders slumped with fatigue. "You didn't sleep at all, did you?" she accused gently. Vaughn shrugged. "Couldn't risk it, not with you burning up and those outlaws possibly still in the area." Gratitude and something deeper swelled in Olivia's chest. This man had no obligation to her beyond basic human decency, yet he'd spent 2 nights fighting to keep her alive at the expense of his own well-being. "We need to get you to town," he said, beginning to pack their meager camp. "That wound needs proper tending, and you need rest in a real bed." Though still weak, Olivia felt markedly better than the previous evening. When Vaughn helped her to stand, her legs wobbled but supported her weight. "See? Stronger already," she said, attempting a smile that turned into a wince as pain flared in her side. Vaughn's arm immediately went around her waist, steadying her. "Easy. Small steps." The journey to his horse was enough to leave Olivia breathless and pale, but she refused to be carried. "I can do this," she insisted. "I'm not made of porcelain." A hint of admiration flickered in Vaughn's eyes. "No, madam, you certainly are not." Mounting was still beyond her strength, however, and she reluctantly allowed Vaughn to lift her onto his horse before swinging up behind her. As they had the day before, his arms encircled her, creating a secure space that felt increasingly like where she belonged. "Redemption Creek is about 3 hours' ride," he told her as they set out. "We'll take it slow, but tell me if you need to stop." The morning was cool, the desert coming alive around them. Quail darted between clumps of sagebrush, and a red-tailed hawk circled lazily overhead. In another circumstance, it might have been a pleasant journey. As they rode, Olivia found herself leaning back against Vaughn's chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. They spoke little, conserving energy, but the silence between them was comfortable rather than strained. After about an hour, Vaughn suddenly reined in, his body tensing. "What is it?" Olivia whispered, sensing his alertness. "Riders ahead," he murmured, turning their horse off the trail and into a stand of junipers. "5 of them, coming fast!" Fear clutched at Olivia's heart. "The Clayton gang? Maybe." Vaughn's hand dropped to his holstered pistol. "Stay quiet." They waited, hidden among the trees, as the sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Vaughn's body was coiled with tension, ready to fight if necessary, despite his exhaustion. As the riders came into view, however, Olivia gasped in recognition. "That's Benjamin Ross!" she exclaimed. "And Sheriff Taylor, they're from town." Vaughn hesitated, his instincts as a hunted man warring with reason. Then, decision made, he guided their horse back onto the trail and hailed the approaching party. "Deputy Marshal Slater," he called. "I've got Miss Sullivan with me." The riders pulled up sharply, expressions of surprise and relief crossing their faces. Sheriff Taylor, a stocky man with a walrus mustache, was the first to speak. "Thank God. We've been searching since dawn. Got word from a freighter that Miss Sullivan was hurt." Benjamin Ross, the town doctor, urged his horse forward. "How badly is she injured?" "Gunshot to the left side," Vaughn reported. "I removed the bullet, but infection set in. It broke last night, but she needs proper medical attention. Dr. Ross nodded grimly. Let's get her back to town immediately. The journey back to Redemption Creek passed in a blur for Olivia. Though she tried to stay alert, the exertion and lingering effects of fever took their toll. She drifted in and out of awareness, sometimes finding herself still cradled against Vaughn's chest, other times being carried on a makeshift stretcher, fashioned from blankets strung between two horses. Through it all, she was aware of Vaughn's unwavering presence nearby. Even when the doctor took charge of her care, the Marshal remained close, his vigilance undiminished despite his obvious exhaustion. When they finally reached town, a crowd had gathered in front of her father's general store. As they approached, the crowd parted to reveal Thomas Sullivan, his face pale with worry, leaning heavily on a cane as he recovered from his own recent illness. "Olivia!" he cried, stumbling forward as the men carried her from the stretcher to a proper bed inside the store's back room, which served as their living quarters. "Father!" she managed weakly, reaching for his hand. "I'm all right. The Marshal saved me." Thomas turned to Vaughn, who stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand. "I don't know how to thank you, sir." "No thanks needed," Vaughn replied. "Just doing my duty." "Nonsense," Thomas insisted. "You saved my daughter's life. You'll stay with us while you're in town. I won't hear of anything else." Before Vaughn could respond, Dr. Ross shooed everyone from the room. "Out, all of you. I need to examine my patient properly." The next few hours passed in a haze of pain and relief for Olivia. The doctor cleaned and redressed her wound, pronounced Vaughn's field surgery surprisingly competent for a lawman, and prescribed bed rest for at least a week. He left her with laudanum for the pain and strict instructions not to exert herself. By the time he allowed visitors again, evening had fallen. Her father came first, sitting beside her bed and holding her hand as she explained about the ambush and the stolen money. "The money doesn't matter," Thomas insisted, his voice thick with emotion. "You're alive, that's all I care about. But the store, we'll manage. Always have." He squeezed her hand. "That Marshal of yours hasn't left the front porch since the doctor kicked him out. Refused food and drink until he knew you were all right." "He's not my Marshal, father," Olivia protested weakly, though the words sent a curious pang through her chest. Thomas gave her a knowing look. "He's been awake for 2 days straight by my count, yet he's still standing guard. That's not just duty, daughter." Before Olivia could form a response, a knock sounded at the door. Thomas rose to answer it, revealing Vaughn standing in the hallway, still looking trail-worn, but cleaner than before. He'd evidently found time to wash the dust from his face and hands. "The doctor says she can have visitors now," Thomas said. "I'll leave you two alone for a bit. Gotta mind the store anyway. Rumors of what happened have brought out half the town looking for news." As her father left, Vaughn entered hesitantly, as if unsure of his welcome now that they were back in civilization. He stood awkwardly near the door, hat in hand, a far cry from the confident lawman who'd carried her through the wilderness. "You should sit before you fall down, Marshal," Olivia said, gesturing to the chair her father had vacated. Vaughn complied, the relief evident in his face as he sank into the seat. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Dr. Ross says you did a fine job with the bullet." She managed a small smile. For a lawman, that earned her a tired chuckle. High praise indeed. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with all the things that had been left unsaid during their ordeal. In the safety of her own room, with clean sheets and proper walls separating them from the wilderness, Olivia suddenly felt shy. This man had seen her at her most vulnerable, had tended wounds that propriety said he should never have glimpsed, had heard confessions meant for no one's ears. "The sheriff has sent telegrams to the Marshal's offices in Tucson and Prescott," Vaughn said finally. "They're organizing posses to track the Clayton gang. With any luck, they'll recover your father's money." "And you?" Olivia asked. "Will you join them?" Something flickered in his gray eyes. Reluctance, perhaps. "It's my duty. I've been tracking them for weeks." "Of course." She looked down at her hands, disappointment settling in her chest like a stone. What had she expected? That he would abandon his sworn duty to remain in Redemption Creek with a woman he barely knew? "Olivia." The way he said her name made her look up. "I've requested 2 days' leave before I join the search, to ensure you're recovering properly." Hope fluttered in her chest. The doctor says I should be up and about in a week, though not back to full strength for longer. A week? He nodded, as if committing the timeline to memory. I should be back by then, God willing. Back? To check on you. His eyes held hers. If that's all right. The simple statement contained a question, one that had nothing to do with her recovery and everything to do with the connection that had formed between them under the most extreme circumstances. I'd like that very much, she replied softly. Vaughn's shoulders relaxed slightly. Tension she hadn't even noticed easing from his frame. You should rest now. You've been through an ordeal. So have you, she pointed out. When did you last sleep? A rueful smile touched his lips. I honestly can't recall. Then you should rest too. Father has prepared the spare room for you. Vaughn hesitated. The Clayton gang is still out there. If they learn you survived to identify them... Marshal Slater, Olivia interrupted, her tone firm despite her weakness. Redemption Creek has a sheriff and 2 deputies. The general store has a sturdy lock, and you are no use to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. For a moment she thought he might argue. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed a warm, genuine sound that transformed his weary features. Yes, madam, he conceded. You make a compelling case. I've been told I can be rather stubborn. I prefer determined. He stood, placing his hat on his head. I'll look in on you tomorrow, if the doctor allows it. At the door, he paused, turning back with an expression that made Olivia's heart beat faster. I meant what I said out there, you know, about the ocean. When you're well enough to travel... He left the offer hanging in the air between them, unfinished yet full of possibility. I'll hold you to that, Marshal Slater, Olivia replied, a smile spreading across her face despite the pain in her side. With the tip of his hat and one last lingering look, Vaughn departed, leaving Olivia to wonder at the strange turns life could take, how a bullet that should have ended her life had instead led her to a man who made her feel truly alive for the first time. True to his word, Vaughn remained in Redemption Creek for 2 days. He spent much of that time with Olivia, sitting beside her bed as she regained her strength, sharing stories of his travels across the territory, and listening with genuine interest to her tales of life in a frontier town. Thomas Sullivan observed their growing closeness with quiet approval. On the evening before Vaughn was due to depart, he invited the Marshal to dinner in Olivia's room, her first meal sitting up in a chair rather than propped against pillows in bed. You're looking stronger, Vaughn noted as he helped her from bed to chair, his hand steady beneath her elbow. I feel stronger, she confirmed. The pain in her side had dulled to a persistent ache, and while she tired easily, her mind was clear and her appetite returning. Thomas served a simple but hearty meal, venison stew, cornbread, and apple pie from the widow Parker, who had been devastated to learn that Olivia's errand to deliver her medicine had ended so tragically. Throughout the meal, Olivia was acutely aware of Vaughn watching her, his eyes warming whenever she looked his way. This wasn't the vigilant gaze of a lawman or the clinical assessment of a caretaker. This was something else entirely, something that made her cheeks flush and her heart beat faster. After dinner, Thomas excused himself to close the store, leaving them alone once more. I leave at first light, Vaughn said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. I know. Olivia smoothed her napkin in her lap. Will it be dangerous, tracking the Clayton gang? I won't lie to you, they're desperate men. But I've dealt with worse. He leaned forward slightly. I'll be careful, Olivia. I have reason to be. The implication in his words made her breath catch. Vaughn? I know it's too soon, he interrupted gently. We've known each other under the most extraordinary circumstances, perhaps in normal times, with normal acquaintance. He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. But I want you to know that I intend to return, not just to check on your recovery, but because... He hesitated, seeming to search for words. Because? Olivia prompted, her heart thundering in her chest. Because in all my years of wandering this territory, I've never felt as drawn to a place or a person as I do to you. The confession emerged in a rush, as if he'd been holding it back through sheer force of will. It defies reason. We barely know each other, yet I feel I've known you always. Olivia reached across the table, her hand finding his. I feel it too. The simple admission changed something in the air between them. Vaughn's fingers tightened around hers, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm that sent shivers up her arm. "When I return," he said, his voice low, "I'd like your permission to call on you properly, if your father approves." "He approves," she assured him with a smile, "though he'd appreciate if you didn't wait too long to come back." Vaughn's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Is that so?" "Well, he mentioned something about needing help restocking the shelves while I recover. Apparently, I'm the only one who knows where everything goes." "Ah, so it's purely practical concern on his part." "Entirely," Olivia agreed, matching his playful tone. Then, more seriously, "Be careful out there, Vaughn. Those men, they didn't hesitate to shoot a woman. They won't show mercy to a lawman." "I'll come back to you," he promised. "That's not something I say lightly." She believed him. In the short time she'd known Vaughn Slater, she'd learned that he was a man of his word, steady, honorable, and resolute. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Olivia insisted on seeing Vaughn off, despite the doctor's orders to remain in bed. Leaning heavily on her father's arm, she made her way to the front porch of the general store, where Vaughn was checking his saddle and supplies. He looked different today. Gone was the exhausted man who had kept vigil by her sickbed. In his place stood a U.S. Marshal, armed and determined, his badge gleaming in the early morning sun. Yet, when he turned and saw her, his expression softened immediately. "You should be resting," he chided gently, moving to her side. "I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye," she replied. Thomas discreetly stepped back, giving them a moment of privacy on the porch. "It's not goodbye," Vaughn said firmly. "It's until we meet again." "Until we meet again," Olivia echoed, finding comfort in the certainty of his tone. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, pressing it into her palm. "I want you to keep this. For safekeeping." Olivia looked down to find a silver pocket watch, its case worn smooth by years of handling. "Vaughn, I couldn't—" "It was my father's," he explained. "The only thing of his I kept after he died. I've carried it every day since." The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on her. This wasn't just a keepsake, it was a promise, a piece of himself he was entrusting to her care. "I'll guard it with my life," she said, closing her fingers around the watch. "Just stay alive," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "That's all I ask." For a brief, heart-stopping moment, Olivia thought he might kiss her right there on the porch in full view of anyone passing by. His gaze dropped to her lips, and he swayed almost imperceptibly toward her. But propriety won out. With visible effort, Vaughn stepped back and touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Sullivan." "Marshal Slater," she returned, matching his formal tone, though her heart was anything but composed. He mounted his horse with fluid grace, settling into the saddle and gathering the reins. "1 week," he said. 2 at most. "I'll be waiting." With a final nod to Thomas, who had rejoined them, Vaughn turned his horse and rode out of Redemption Creek, his straight-backed figure gradually diminishing as he headed west toward the mountains where the Clayton gang was rumored to be hiding. Olivia stood watching long after he disappeared from view, the weight of his father's watch warm in her palm. "He'll be back," Thomas said, placing a supportive arm around her shoulders. "Men like that keep their promises." "I know," Olivia replied, though anxiety already gnawed at her. The Clayton gang had nearly killed her. What would they do to the Marshal hunting them? The days that followed passed with excruciating slowness. As her strength returned, Olivia graduated from bed to chair to short walks around the store. By the end of the week, she was able to help with simple tasks, counting inventory, organizing shipments, writing orders for supplies. Through it all, she kept Vaughn's watch close, often taking it from her pocket to check the time, running her thumb over its engraved case, opening it to read the inscription inside, "To my son, stand firm in what you believe. T.S." Each night, she wound it carefully, the ritual becoming a kind of prayer for Vaughn's safe return. News trickled in sporadically. The posse had tracked the gang to an abandoned mine near the territorial border. Shots had been exchanged, but no casualties reported. The outlaws had split up, making pursuit more difficult. As 1 week stretched into 2, Olivia's worry deepened. She took to sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the western road for any sign of riders, ignoring the concerned glances her father exchanged with Dr. Ross during his visits to check her healing wound. "He's a U.S. Marshal, Olivia," the doctor reminded her gently after examining her side and pronouncing it healing nicely. "This is the work he's trained for." "I know," she acknowledged, "but knowing doesn't make the waiting any easier." On the 16th day after Vaughn's departure, a telegram arrived for Sheriff Taylor. Olivia was helping a customer when the lawman burst into the general store, his face grim. "Thomas," he called, ignoring normal pleasantries. "There's been a shootout near Bisbee. The Clayton gang was cornered at a line shack." Olivia's heart seemed to stop. "And Marshal Slater?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The sheriff hesitated, glancing between father and daughter. "Wounded, according to the wire. No details on how badly. They've taken him to the doctor in Bisbee." The room tilted alarmingly, and Olivia gripped the counter for support. "I need to go to him," she said, her decision immediate and absolute. "Olivia, be reasonable," Thomas protested. "Bisbee is nearly 100 miles away. You're still recovering yourself." "I don't care." She turned to face her father, determination etched in every line of her body. "He saved my life, Father. He sat by my side for 2 days and nights when I was at death's door. I won't leave him alone now." Thomas studied his daughter's face for a long moment, then sighed in resignation. "The stage leaves for Tucson tomorrow morning. We can connect to Bisbee from there." "We?" Olivia questioned. "You don't think I'd let you travel alone in your condition, do you?" He shook his head. "Besides, I owe the man a debt myself. He brought my daughter back to me." Relief and gratitude washed over Olivia. She embraced her father tightly, mindful of her healing side. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Thomas cautioned. "It'll be a hard journey, and we don't know what we'll find when we get there." The stagecoach journey was indeed grueling, though her wound was healing well. Each jolt and lurch of the coach sent twinges of pain through Olivia's side. She endured without complaint, her thoughts fixed on reaching Vaughn. They arrived in Bisbee 3 days later, dusty and exhausted. The mining town was larger than Redemption Creek, its streets bustling with activity as copper ore from the surrounding hills brought prosperity and growth. The doctor's office was easy to find, a whitewashed building near the center of town, with a red cross painted on the door. As they approached, Olivia's steps faltered. What if they were too late? What if Vaughn's wounds had proven fatal in the days it had taken them to reach Bisbee? Thomas seemed to sense her fear. "Courage, daughter," he murmured, offering his arm for support. Drawing a deep breath, Olivia knocked on the door. It was opened by a harried-looking woman in an apron who introduced herself as Mrs. Halloway, the doctor's wife and assistant. "We're here about Marshal Slater," Thomas explained. "We received word he was wounded in a shootout with the Clayton gang." Recognition dawned in Mrs. Halloway's eyes as she looked at Olivia. "You must be Miss Sullivan," she said. "He's been asking for you whenever the fever lets him speak coherently." Hope and fear warred in Olivia's chest. "How badly is he hurt?" "Took a bullet to the shoulder and another grazed his temple," Mrs. Halloway replied, leading them inside. "The shoulder wound is clean, went straight through, but the head injury caused considerable concern. He's been unconscious more often than not these past days." She led them to a small room at the back of the house. "He's sleeping now. The fever broke last night, thank the Lord. Dr. Halloway says if infection doesn't set in, he should recover." Olivia barely heard the woman's reassurances. Her attention was fixed entirely on the still figure in the narrow bed. Vaughn lay motionless, his face pale beneath his tan, a white bandage wrapped around his head, and another visible beneath the collar of his nightshirt. His strong hands, which had tended her so carefully, lay limp atop the blanket. "Vaughn," she whispered, moving to his side. Thomas and Mrs. Halloway withdrew discreetly, closing the door to give them privacy. Olivia sank into the chair beside the bed, taking Vaughn's hand in hers. It was warm, too warm, evidence of the fever Mrs. Halloway had mentioned, but the steady pulse beneath her fingers reassured her. "I'm here," she told him, though she wasn't sure he could hear her. "I came as soon as we got word you were hurt." For a long moment, there was no response. Then, almost imperceptibly, his fingers tightened around hers. "Olivia," His voice was a rasp, his eyes struggling to focus as they opened. "Yes," she confirmed, joy and relief surging through her. "It's me." Confusion clouded his features. "You can't be here. Bisbee is too far. You're still recovering." "As are you, it seems." She brushed a lock of dark hair from his forehead. "Did you really think I wouldn't come?" A ghost of his familiar smile touched his lips. "Stubborn woman." "Determined," she corrected, echoing his words from weeks before. His eyes drifted closed again, but his grip on her hand remained. "The gang?" he asked, his voice fading as exhaustion pulled him back towards sleep. "Captured or killed, according to the sheriff's telegram. And they recovered the stolen money, including my father's." Satisfaction flickered across Vaughn's face. "Told you I'd get it back," he murmured. "Yes, you did." Olivia blinked back tears. "You've kept all your promises. Now keep one more, get well, Vaughn." "Yes, madam," he whispered as sleep claimed him once more. For the next 3 days, Olivia barely left Vaughn's side. She helped Mrs. Halloway change his bandages, spooned broth between his lips when he was conscious enough to swallow, and read to him from the town's weekly newspaper when he grew restless. Thomas arranged accommodations at the hotel across the street and visited several times a day, bringing food and fresh clothing. He watched his daughter's devotion to the wounded Marshal with knowing eyes but said nothing, recognizing that the connection between them had only deepened through this new crisis. On the 4th day, Vaughn was finally alert enough to sit up in bed. The color had returned to his face, and though he tired easily, Dr. Halloway pronounced him out of danger. "You're a fortunate man, Marshal," the doctor said as he checked the healing wound on Vaughn's shoulder. 2 inches lower, and that bullet would have found your heart." "I know exactly how fortunate I am," Vaughn replied, his eyes finding Olivia's across the room. When the doctor left, she moved to sit beside him on the edge of the bed, closer than propriety strictly allowed, but past caring about such conventions. "Tell me what happened," she requested, taking his hand in hers. Vaughn sighed, the memories clearly troubling. "We tracked them to a line shack near the border, had them surrounded me, 2 deputies from Tucson, and a posse from Prescott." His jaw tightened. They wouldn't surrender. Clayton himself came out shooting, got one of the deputies before anyone could react. Olivia squeezed his hand in silent support. "After that, it was chaos, bullets flying everywhere. I took one in the shoulder early on, but kept firing." His free hand moved to the bandage on his head. "Don't remember much after that. They tell me a bullet grazed my temple, knocked me unconscious." "You could have been killed," Olivia said softly, the reality of how close she'd come to losing him hitting her anew. "Hazard of the job." He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Though I admit, I've been thinking a lot about that job lately." Before she could ask what he meant, the door opened to admit Thomas Sullivan. "Marshal," he greeted warmly. "Good to see you sitting up. You look more like yourself today." "Feeling more like myself, sir," Vaughn replied. "Thanks in no small part to your daughter's care." Thomas nodded, his expression growing serious. "I wonder if I might have a word with you, Marshal. In private." Olivia looked between the 2 men, curiosity piqued. "Should I be concerned about this mysterious conversation?" "Not at all," her father assured her. "Just a matter between men." Though reluctant, Olivia excused herself, promising to return with fresh coffee from the hotel. As she closed the door behind her, she caught a glimpse of Vaughn's face, nervous yet determined, like a man about to leap from a great height. When she returned half an hour later, both men looked up with such identical expressions of poorly concealed satisfaction that she knew immediately something significant had transpired in her absence. "What are you 2 plotting?" she demanded, setting down the coffee tray. "Nothing sinister, I assure you," Thomas replied, rising from his chair. "I'll leave you 2 to talk. I've some business at the bank to attend to." Once he'd gone, Olivia turned expectant eyes on Vaughn. "Well?" Instead of answering immediately, he reached for her hand, drawing her to sit beside him once more. "Your father is an interesting man," he began, direct in his approach, much like his daughter. "Vaughn," Olivia said warningly, "if you don't tell me what this is about—" "I asked for his blessing," Vaughn interrupted, his gray eyes serious, "to court you properly when I'm well enough to leave this bed." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. "And did he give it?" He did, with one condition. A smile tugged at Vaughn's lips. That I consider settling in Redemption Creek rather than continuing to travel the territory as a marshal. And what did you say? Olivia could scarcely breathe as she waited for his answer. I said I'd been considering hanging up my badge for some time now, that perhaps a man who's seen as much violence as I have might be ready for a quieter life. He squeezed her hand. A life with roots, Olivia, with a home, with someone to come home to. The simple words held such promise that tears sprang to Olivia's eyes. You'd give up being a marshal? For me? For us, he corrected gently. If you want that too. I do, she whispered, more than anything. Relief and joy washed over Vaughn's features. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth spiraling through her. Your father mentioned the town has been looking for a new sheriff since Taylor is retiring next month. Olivia laughed through her tears. Always the lawman. It's what I know, he admitted. But a sheriff stays put, comes home each night. To his wife? The question slipped out before Olivia could consider its boldness. Vaughn's eyes widened slightly, then crinkled at the corners as he smiled. I hadn't planned to ask quite so soon, or while confined to a sickbed, but he shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounded shoulder. Yes, Olivia, to his wife. If she'll have him. She will, Olivia assured him, propriety forgotten, as she leaned forward to press her lips to his, in a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. 2 months later, with summer fading into autumn, Olivia stood before the mirror in her bedroom, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. The simple white dress she wore had been her mother's, carefully preserved all these years, and altered by the town seamstress to fit her slimmer frame. Orange blossoms and sage adorned her upswept hair, symbols of fertility and longevity that the older women of Redemption Creek insisted were essential for a bride. You look beautiful, Thomas said from the doorway, his voice thick with emotion. Your mother would be so proud. Olivia turned, smiling through the tears that threatened to fall. Do you think she would approve? Of Vaughn, of everything happening so quickly? She'd say when you find true happiness, you don't question its timing. He offered his arm. Ready, daughter? Your groom is waiting, and if his pacing wears any more of a trench in the church floor, Reverend Michaels may charge us for repairs. The small church was filled to capacity not just with the residents of Redemption Creek, but also with visitors from neighboring towns and several U.S. Marshals who had served with Vaughn. Even Dr. and Mrs. Halloway had made the journey from Bisbee to witness the union of the couple whose love story had begun so dramatically. As Olivia walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she had eyes only for Vaughn. He stood tall and straight at the altar, fully recovered from his wounds, his dark hair neatly trimmed, and his usually weather-worn face clean-shaven for the occasion. He wore a new black suit, his only concession to his former profession, the silver marshal's badge pinned to his vest, his last day wearing it, as he'd officially resigned his position the previous week. When their eyes met, everything else faded away, the murmurs of the congregation, the scent of wildflowers decorating the church, the weight of tradition and expectation. There was only Vaughn, his gray eyes filled with a love so palpable it took her breath away. Thomas placed Olivia's hand in Vaughn's, the symbolic passing of responsibility from father to husband, carrying deeper meaning after all they had endured. Take care of each other, Thomas said simply, before stepping back to take his seat. Reverend Michaels began the ceremony, his words washing over Olivia like gentle rain, the promises they exchanged to love, honor, and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, seemed especially poignant given the circumstances of their meeting. When Vaughn slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, his hand was steady, his voice clear and certain as he recited his vows. And when he spoke the final words, "Until death do us part," there was a fierceness in his tone that made Olivia's heart swell with certainty that this man, who had already saved her life once, would spend the rest of his days ensuring she lived it fully and well. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Michaels declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. The kiss they shared was brief but tender, mindful of the audience yet honest in its promise of deeper intimacy to come. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, A cheer went up that seemed to shake the rafters of the little church. Vaughn's arm tightened around Olivia's waist, and she leaned into his strength, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in the space of a few short months. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. The town square had been decorated with lanterns and bunting, tables groaning with food contributed by every household in Redemption Creek. There was dancing to fiddle music, toasts offered with varying degrees of eloquence, and the kind of genuine community fellowship that made frontier life bearable despite its hardships. As the evening waned, Vaughn found his bride sitting at a table with several older women, their heads bent together in conversation that ceased abruptly when he approached. "Sharing secrets already, Mrs. Slater?" he inquired, extending his hand to her. The her new name sent a thrill through Olivia as she accepted his hand and rose. "Merely advice for a new bride," she replied, her cheeks flushing at the knowing looks the women exchanged. "Then I hope you'll forgive me for stealing you away," Vaughn said to the group, though his eyes never left Olivia's face. "I believe it's time I took my wife home." The small house they would share stood at the edge of town, not grand by any means, but solid and well-built, with a view of the mountains to the west. Vaughn had purchased it with his savings, spending every spare moment of his convalescence repairing the roof, replacing broken windows, and building new furniture with his own hands. As they approached the front porch, illuminated by a single lantern left burning in welcome, Vaughn paused. "I believe there's a tradition to uphold," he said, a gleam in his eye as he swept Olivia into his arms. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he carried her across the threshold. "Your shoulder is fully healed," he assured her, setting her gently on her feet in the main room, "as is the rest of me." The implication in his words sent heat rushing to Olivia's cheeks. Despite the intimacy they had shared during her recovery and his, despite the kisses stolen in shadowed corners over the past weeks, they had maintained propriety in the broader sense, waiting for their wedding night, for the final consummation of their love. Now, alone at last in the home they would share, that moment had arrived. Nervousness fluttered in Olivia's stomach, not fear, but the anticipation of stepping into an unknown territory with the man she loved. Vaughn seemed to sense her thoughts. "We have all the time in the world," he said softly, taking her hands in his. "Nothing need happen tonight that you don't wish." Olivia stepped closer, tilting her face up to his. "I wish to be your wife in every way, Vaughn. I'm just nervous," he finished for her. "As am I." His admission surprised her. "You are?" A smile touched his lips. "I want to be worthy of you, Olivia, of your trust, your love." "You already are," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. The kiss deepened, transforming from gentle reassurance to something more urgent. Vaughn's arms encircled her, drawing her against the solid warmth of his body as months of restrained desire found expression at last. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, eyes dark with shared wanting. "Perhaps," Vaughn suggested, his voice rougher than usual, "we should continue this conversation in our bedroom." Our bedroom. The simple phrase contained such intimacy, such promise of shared futures, that Olivia felt her heart might burst with happiness. Taking his hand, she led him down the short hallway to the room they would share for all the nights to come. The large bed, Vaughn's handiwork, dominated the space, covered with a quilt Olivia had brought from her father's home. In the golden light of the bedside lamp, they undressed each other slowly, reverently, pausing to explore each new expanse of skin revealed. When Olivia's fingers traced the puckered scar on Vaughn's shoulder, legacy of the bullet that had nearly taken him from her, he caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "A small price to pay," he murmured, "for the life I've found with you." As they came together on the bed they would share for a lifetime, Vaughn's touches were gentle yet sure, guiding Olivia through the initial discomfort to a place of such exquisite pleasure that all her maiden's fears dissolved like morning mist. In his arms, she discovered parts of herself she hadn't known, existed passionate, uninhibited, capable of both giving and receiving joy in equal measure. Later, as they lay tangled in sheets in each other, Olivia rested her head on Vaughn's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare back, occasional kisses pressed to her temple or the crown of her head. "Happy?" he asked, the word a rumble beneath her ear. "Completely," she confirmed, propping herself up to look into his face. In the soft lamplight, his features were relaxed, the habitual vigilance of the lawman replaced by the contentment of a man who has found his place in the world. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You know, when I first found you on that trail, bleeding and barely conscious, all I could think was that I couldn't let you die this beautiful, unknown woman who'd crossed my path by chance or fate." Olivia remembered those moments in fragments, the pain, the fear, and above all, the sound of Vaughn's voice urging her to hold on. "You laid me down so gently," she recalled, "and you promised I would live." "I did." His arms tightened around her. "And I intend to spend the rest of my days making sure you live well, Olivia Slater. That's my new oath, not to a badge or a territory, but to you." The future stretched before them, as vast and promising as the western sky children perhaps. The growth of their community, the daily joys and sorrows of a life shared. There would be challenges, of course. The frontier was unforgiving, and even a town as established as Redemption Creek faced its share of hardships. But as Olivia drifted toward sleep in her husband's embrace, she knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever came, they would face it together. The bullet that should have ended her life had instead been the beginning of something far greater than she could have imagined, a love born in crisis, tempered by adversity, and destined to endure. 5 years passed, transforming Redemption Creek from a struggling mining outpost to a prosperous town with a proper school, a bank, and even a small hospital, where Dr. Simmons, newly arrived from Boston, tended to the community's medical needs. Sheriff Vaughn Slater had played no small part in this transformation. His reputation for fairness and unwavering justice had brought stability to a region once plagued by lawlessness. Under his watch, businesses flourished, families settled, and the town grew in both size and stature. But it was as a husband and father that Vaughn found his greatest fulfillment. The small house at the edge of town had expanded to accommodate their growing family, a sturdy addition built with Vaughn's own hands when Olivia announced she was expecting their first child. Now, as spring sunshine filtered through the kitchen window, Olivia watched her husband swing their 3-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, high into the air, while their infant son, Thomas, named for his grandfather, slept peacefully in his cradle nearby. "Higher, Papa," Elizabeth demanded, her dark hair so like her father's flying as Vaughn obliged, her delighted squeals filling the room. "Careful," Olivia cautioned, though she couldn't suppress a smile at their antics. "If you break another lamp, Mrs. Perkins will never let us hear the end of it." Vaughn caught their daughter and settled her on his hip, pressing a kiss to her rosy cheek. "Your mama's right, little one. We must behave like civilized folks." "Syphilized," Elizabeth attempted, wrapping chubby arms around her father's neck. "Close enough," Vaughn chuckled, crossing the room to where Olivia stood, kneading bread dough for the day's baking. "And how are you this morning, Mrs. Slater?" he asked, his free arm slipping around her waist to draw her against his side. "Better now that the morning sickness has passed," she replied, her hand drifting to the slight curve of her belly where their third child was just beginning to show. "Though your son seems determined to make his presence known earlier than his siblings did." Vaughn's eyes widened. "His? You're certain it's a boy?" "Not certain," Olivia admitted, "but I have a feeling, and my feelings have been right twice before." He pressed a kiss to her temple, his expression one of continued wonder at the life they'd created together. "Boy or girl, as long as the child is healthy and you're well, I'll be the happiest man in the territory." A knock at the door interrupted the family moment. Vaughn reluctantly released Olivia to answer it, finding Deputy Collins standing on the porch, looking apologetic. "Sorry to disturb you at home, Sheriff," the young man said, twisting his hat in his hands. "But there's trouble at the saloon. Miller and Jenkins are at it again, and Mr. Hollister says they'll be shooting if somebody doesn't step in." Vaughn sighed, glancing back at his family. "I'll be right there, Collins. Wait for me at the corner." As the deputy departed, Vaughn returned to the kitchen, his expression regretful. "Duty calls," he said, retrieving his gun belt from the hook by the back door. "Go," Olivia urged, understanding as always. We'll be fine, and perhaps you can stop by Father's store on your way back. He sent word that the books I ordered from back east have finally arrived. I will. Vaughn buckled his belt, checked his pistol out of long habit, then leaned down to kiss Elizabeth's forehead. Be good for your mama, princess. I will, Papa, she promised solemnly. He moved to the cradle next, gently touching his sleeping son's cheek, then turned to Olivia. The kiss they shared was brief but tender, filled with the comfortable affection of years together, yet still holding echoes of the passion that had first drawn them to each other. I love you, he murmured against her lips. And I you, she replied. Now go restore peace to our fair town. Sheriff. With a final smile, Vaughn donned his hat and headed out to deal with the saloon dispute, his tall figure cutting an imposing silhouette against the morning sunshine. Olivia watched him go, gratitude filling her heart. Each day she thanked whatever providence had placed Vaughn Slater on that lonely trail 5 years ago, allowing him to find her in her moment of greatest need. She often thought about that day, how close she had come to death, and how a stranger's determination had pulled her back from the brink. The moment remained etched in her memory, the weight of Vaughn's arms cradling her broken body, the fierce certainty in his eyes as he laid her down in the shade of cottonwood trees, his voice rough with emotion as he whispered, "You'll live, I promise you'll live." It was a promise he had kept, in ways neither of them could have imagined at the time, for Vaughn hadn't just saved her life. That day he had given her a life worth living, filled with love and purpose, and the kind of happiness she had once only read about in books. As Elizabeth tugged at her skirt, demanding cookies and stories, and baby Thomas began to stir in his cradle, Olivia turned from the window to tend to her children, secure in the knowledge that, when the day's duties were done, Vaughn would return to them, to the home and family they had built together in this once wild corner of the West. And in that certainty lay the greatest adventure of all.